Good morning everyone and welcome back to another review of the League of Explorers, a Hearthstone adventure. My name is Rooster and the question we would like to ask ourselves today is the second wing, called Uldaman, worth buying for you? We discussed the first wing in the previous episode, and we've also taken a broad look as a sort of preview at the adventure as a whole, but this one will zoom in on the second wing of this adventure called Uldaman, where we will follow the adventures of Bran Bronzebeard, who many of us might already know from his adventures in World of Warcraft, where we follow him in a couple of dungeons. Not Uldaman, unfortunately, but he'll be here making up for lost time. So what is Uldaman? Uldaman is located in the Badlands, which are found in the Eastern Kingdoms, somewhere below Loch Modan and east of Sirin Gorge. So Uldaman is an ancient Titan city buried underground, where they experimented with creating a race of stone people, who eventually ended up being the dwarves, but one of their failed experiments were the trogs, and recent dwarven excavations have unleashed these trogs upon the Eastern Kingdoms, so that's where the trogs came from. But also ancient Titan treasures might be still hidden inside, guarded by the Titan Guardians. So the bosses in the second wing, Uldaman, are Chieftain Scarvash, the leader of the Trog tribe in there, the Mineshaft encounter, where we run away from the Trogs and the Titan Guardians, heading deeper into the temple. And the final boss is Arcadas, the Titan Guardian, guarding the artifact of ancient knowledge, detailing some of the history of the Dwarven people, among other things. So if we take a look at the first boss real quick, he has an ability called Trog Hate Minions. It's a passive hero power, so he doesn't activate it, it just happens, and it's only in effect during your turn. Well, also during his turn, but that doesn't really mean anything. And says your minions cost 2 more. He starts with this one, but at the start of your turn, well, start of his turn actually, it swaps into the other half, which makes your spells cost 2 more. So on every odd turn, you get to cast minions at a 2 mana penalty, and on every even turn, you cast spells with a 2 mana penalty. Besides that, he has a couple of rather unimpressive minions in his deck, and also has a lot of the generic trogs in his deck, which gain attack when you cast spells, so that might be something to keep in mind if you're having trouble. Some spells you could expect are Rampage, which gives a damaged minion +3/+3. It might disincentivize you to leave damaged minions on his side. Confuse might make totems a liability, and cards like Doomsayer. And he's using the new Hunter Trap, Dart Trap, which triggers when you use your hero power and deals 5 damage to a random enemy, so you're best off either not using your hero power when he has a trap, or making sure your board is cluttered with small minions to make this as relatively unpainful as possible. The second encounter, Mineshaft, is a really special one because you don't get to create your own deck for this one. It's another survival adventure where you have just to survive 10 turns, and every turn he will activate, or the encounter will activate, the Fleet of Mind power, which will spawn 2 out of these 3 minions. And on normal mode, there are also some other minions like this rock here, which doesn't actually exist. So it's in the game files, but it isn't used. I've never seen it before. This rock, however, with only 3 health, is also a possibility, and that's probably the most easy one. But the unique part of this encounter is in the deck that you'll be using. You have a hero power called Throw Rocks, which deals 3 damage to a random enemy minion. That sounds rather good, but it's rather ineffective when you consider that you only have 2 mana each turn, and that you'll draw 1 card, and that every card in your deck costs 1 mana. So basically you get to do 2 things every turn, which is either to use the Dynamite card to deal 10 damage to a target. You can use the Boom card to deal 3 damage to all enemy minions, which, as you remember, is half of their health, because every enemy minion will have either 6 or 3 health if it's the rock. You have the ability to use spike decoys, which are taunt minions that can't attack, but deal 3 damage and have 6 health. And you have mechanical parrots, which you can actually direct, but most of the time won't be attacked by enemy minions, because it doesn't have taunt. Finally, there's some special cards like Barrel Forward, which brings you 1 turn closer to the exit, but has a 0 effect on the board. So that's one you'll likely either use when there's no real danger on the board, or at the very end, because you can use this card to actually win the game. Consult Bran, which draws you 3 cards, also has no effect on the board, but can be important to actually give you options to use later on in the game, because you'll be running out of cards rather quickly without this one. And Repairs, which restores 10 health to your hero, and you will need it, because the 6/6 minions are rather dangerous. That's an interesting challenge. And I liked experimenting with it, but it can be rather reliant on your luck of the draw. I've observed a friend play 3 games in a row in which he got no dynamite and no 3 damage to all enemy minions, and those were basically impossible. So do keep that in mind. There are some games that just cannot be won. The third and last encounter is Arcadus, the final boss in the Uldaman dungeon in the World of Warcraft game, who has a rather curious hero power, Stone Sculpting, which summons a 0/2 statue for both players. That's really interesting, and what isn't detailed in this hero power is that it's a compulsory one, so he will use it at the start of every one of his turns. Which basically costs him 1 mana every turn, so that's something to keep in mind. He also has a couple of special cards in his deck. The Earthen Statues look like this, don't have taunt or anything, but he does have a spell that allows him to give all of his minions +1/+1 and taunt, which makes these Earthen Statues rather annoying to deal with. And also has a Shattering Spree, which destroys all statues, that means on both sides of the field. And for each destroyed statue, he deals 1 damage. Most of the time, this will be directed straight at your face. He also uses Looming Presence, which we know from the Sunraider Ferrix encounter in the first wing, which draws cards and gains armor. His deck is a little bit better equipped to make use of these stone statues. For example, he runs the new Paladin secret, Sacred Trial. When your opponent has at least 3 minions and plays an honor, well, you're likely to have at least 3 minions because he keeps giving you ones. So keep this in mind. If he has a Paladin secret, then the first minion you're playing is likely going to get killed. He's using Earth Elementals to defend his face, basically, and using, for example, Flame-Tongue Totems and other buff effects to make better use of his 0/2 statues. Of course, the AI doesn't make perfect use of it, and sometimes makes some really silly decisions with these. Finally, there's 2 more class challenges. The first is the Druid class challenge against Chieftain Scarfash, which uses cards like Druid of the Saber, Living Roots, to make some tokens and aggressive minions, along with Savage Roar to deal a lot of damage at a time. It's a beast-focused druid deck, it has a lot of beasts in it. Nothing too special, nothing that seems too focused on the theme of this encounter, although there are more odd-numbered spells and even-numbered minions in the deck, so that's something you can also consider in your own endeavors. The other class challenge is the Arcadus encounter. It's a Paladin class challenge, and it gives you a relatively token-focused deck with a lot of buffs like Raid Leader, the new Keeper of Uldaman card, Bulvar Foldragon, basically letting you make use of the 0/2 statues that you're given by the boss. Should also not be too bad of an encounter. Sword of Justice is especially nice because the 0/2 statue already gets a +1/+1 buff. And Competitive Spirit also works really, really well. This shouldn't be a hard challenge, but it's a relatively fun one. So on Heroic mode, these bosses take on a different aspect. Heroic Scarfash has the alternating hero power again, starts with 15 armor, but his hero power now says enemy minions cost 11 mana. That means without discounts, you're not going to be able to cast them. So he starts out with this one, so you can only cast spells on the first turn, and you can only cast minions on the second turn because then he switches to trocate spells. So you have to really balance your mana curve out, and to make matters worse, he starts out with a set of trogs on the board already, which really punishes you for playing your spells on turn 1 and turn 3 especially. So you'd better make sure that those spells get rid of these minions. It's a relatively tough one. I haven't found the perfect strategy for this one yet, but I'd like to think about it some more. This is a thought-provoking one. The Heroic Mineshaft, I have to admit I haven't seen too much of a difference in this one. The encounter also starts out with 3 random trogs, spawns 2 trogs or 2 enemies every turn. Same cards are in the deck. The only thing that I've noticed is different is the debris. They don't exist. So every turn there will be 2 new enemies to fight. It's still a very random encounter and more reliant on what cards you're getting and how many lumbering golems the encounter gives you than on making careful use of your resources provided. And the final boss is Arcadas, of course, who now starts out with 15 armor, still has the same hero power, summoning a statue for both players, the difference now being that his statues are 0-5, while yours are still 0-2. Also, his cards have received some slight upgrades, like Animate Earthen, now for 2 mana gives his minions +3/+3 and Taunt, which makes it really important to get rid of them as quickly as possible. Also, Shattering Spree now destroys all statues and deals 3 damage, which is a rather high amount of damage, especially when it's most likely going straight for your face. So something to keep in mind. Also, his card drawing card now draws 3 cards and 6 armor for 3 mana. This looks more challenging than it actually is, just because his deck is very, very synergistic with the earthen statues that he creates, and he's not making too good use of it. So let's take a look at the cards in the expansion and take a look at what decks they might fit in and whether or not they are really competitive. First of these is Tunnel Trog, which is a Shaman card. Whenever you overload, gain +1 attack per locked mana crystal. This is the card that Shaman needed to have some competitive decks again. This seems to work mostly in aggressive decks so far, and has some really nice synergy, for example with Totem Golem on the next turn, Feral Spirit on turn 3, and Lightning Bolt. Really serves the purpose of, for example, a Mana Worm in Mage, an early minion to drop to trade up against a minion that costs more and therefore have some board presence. So far it's proven to be a really good card and something shamans have sorely needed. The other card from the first boss is Ethereal Conjurer, which is a 5 mana 6/3 minion with Battlecry, discover a spell. So that's an interesting card, because it's a 5 mana minion that draws a card, which of course is very similar to Azure Drake, but of course there are some key differences here. Like the Azure Drake has spell damage, has 1 more health, which is really important on an expensive minion, because the Ethereal Conjurer is likely to die quickly. So the main advantages of the Conjurer here are the 6 attack, which allows him to trade really well, or allows him to quickly finish off the game if not dealt with swiftly. And the other benefit is, again, remember that Discovery normally gives you a choice between neutral and class cards, but because this discovers a spell and there are no neutral spells, you will get your choice of 3 random mage spells. So what does 3 random mage spells mean? What are your chances of getting something you actually want? You are 62% likely to find a secret in one of your 3 cards. You have a 50% chance to get a card that offers reach, which means direct damage to your opponent, or a card that provides tempo, such as Mirror Entity or Effigy. You are 56% likely to find a card with either a freeze effect, a heal effect, or a taunt effect, which might help if you're behind or in danger of dying soon. You have a 28% chance of gaining more card advantage. Remember that a 5 mana minion that draws a card is already card neutral, because you're not paying a card to get it. But if you discover a card like Arcane Intellect, you'll be drawing even more cards for it. And you have a 93% chance to get a removal spell, a spell that interacts with your opponent's minions by dealing damage to them. 93% chance. That's of obtaining at least one card that deals damage to your opponent's minions. So we can divide this into spells that deal a lot of damage, a medium amount of damage, and a small amount of damage. But you can see that this card will likely give you an answer to the minion or to the board state your opponent is currently facing you with. And that's the thing that separates the Ethereal Conjurer from the Azure Drake. Now, people haven't really caught on to this card just yet. It's seen some play in some singleton mage decks, I think. But it has some real potential. It just hasn't really reared its face yet. For the second encounter, we unlock the Tomb Spider, which has Battlecry Discover a Beast, so we'll be talking Discover some more. Discover a beast, that means you have some class beasts, but most of them are actually neutral. This means because neutral beasts are generally not that impressive, that the classes interested in Tomb Spider will generally be classes with a lot of good beasts as their class card. So first of all, let's look at the new cards provided to Warrior and Rogue. You have a 15% chance of getting offered this specific card when you play Tomb Spider as a Warrior or a Rogue. And the rest of the cards will be neutral beasts. That's not too exciting, even though they may be good cards. You're not playing Tomb Spider to get a Fierce Monkey or a Pit Snake now. No, you're not. So let's take a look at two other classes, namely Druid. Druid only has 3 beasts in its class arsenal, because remember that Druids are not actually beasts until they morph into their animal form. So that means, at the moment there's only 3 choices, which gives you a 34% chance to find one of these 3 cards, which are all excellent cards, when you play a Tomb Spider. That's actually interesting, because you are very likely to get offered one of these, and you'll also still have the option of picking a neutral beast if a 7 mana minion is just not what you're looking for right now. When the next wing releases, another card will be added, the Jungle Moonkin, which is an acceptable card but a little more niche, which will improve the chance of you getting a Druid minion in the cards offered by the Tomb Spider. And finally, the class you've been expecting when we're talking about beasts. Hunter has a lot of beasts in his class minions. Almost all of his class minions are beasts. There's one mech, I believe, and a couple of cards that interact with beasts. Most of them are pretty decent, but you have to keep in mind that some of the Hunter minions, like the Starving Buzzard and the Acid Maw, are just not what you're looking for. So it's a little less effective when you're a hunter, but it might still be a really good card, seeing as it does give you a very high chance of getting a hunter-specific beast when you play it, and it's actually card advantage. That last point is something hunters might not be actually looking for, so you'll be looking at the slower hunter decks that will be interested in this card. Finally, the chances of getting a hunter card will improve when in Wing 4 actually, not Wing 3. Desert Camel will be added. And that's probably a good card, so the quality goes up, the chance goes up a little. Probably a good addition. Now for the Unearthed Raptor, which is a really interesting card. It's a rogue card, 3 mana 3/4 minion. Battlecry, choose a friendly minion, gain a copy of its Death Rattle effect. So we can just slot this right into an existing rogue deck, because rogues generally don't run a lot of Death Rattle minions. So what are we looking at? We are looking at a very efficient minion, which can copy a Death Rattle effect from one of your other minions. So what you want to find for these are either the really powerful Death Rattle effects like the Nerubian Egg or the Sylvanas, or just some generic value Death Rattles like the Loot Hoarder, which curve excellently. You can play a turn 2 Loot Hoarder and then a turn 3 Unearthed Raptor. And a 3/4 minion for 3 mana, which draws a card when it dies, is excellent value. But you'll have to craft a deck around this card. Do keep in mind that even if you do not have a Death Rattle minion on the board, sometimes you'll just have to play the Unearthed Raptor as it is. And that's fine, because it's still a Spider Tank, and a Spider Tank is a fine minion. Also, at the moment, Unearthed Raptor is a little bit buggy, and some people may have issues when their opponent plays an Unearthed Raptor, maybe even when they themselves play an Unearthed Raptor. which causes their game to disconnect. My personal recommendation for now is when your opponent plays a raptor, check the game history on the left side of your screen. Is the raptor actually showing up there? Then your game is probably fine. But if the raptor is on the board, nothing is happening, and it's not in the game history, then you might want to restart your client just in case you'll get back in and actually be able to do something. But if your game has actually crashed, you have most likely lost this game already. Blizzard has said they will fix it soon. I'm hoping that will be within a few days. So the warrior card, Fierce Monkey, it's a 3/4 minion for 3 again, so that sounds familiar. Yeah, it's Spider Tank territory again. But this minion does get taunt in addition, and that might actually be really helpful. Actually makes the taunt on a 3/4 minion really important, and it's a very decent card. Especially when you compare it to the other options warriors have on the 3 slot. I don't have high expectations for this card in Constructed, but it could be cute. So as the second card, rewarded by the third boss, Reliquary Seeker is an interesting card. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with Battlecry. If you have 6 other minions, gain +4/+4. That's a 5/5 for 1 mana. The only thing you have to do is have 6 other minions on the board. That doesn't sound like it's going to happen too often, and it doesn't sound like it's going to be helpful that often. But people have surprisingly made this card actually work in more zoo-type warlock decks with, for example, Haunted Creeper, Implosion, and Echoing Ooze to enable this card. And when you actually get it going in a turn where you're playing like 3 additional minions, adding a 5/5 on top of that for just 1 mana is actually pretty good. Whether it has any long-term viability remains to be seen, but this card has overperformed. Now for defeating every boss in this wing, and thus defeating the third boss because you have to do them sequentially, we have Bran Bronzebeard, legendary 3 mana 2/4 minion, your Battlecry's triggered twice. This is an interesting card, does basically the same as Baron Riven there from Naxxramas, but it has immediate effect on the board. That's really important. You can have nothing on the board and then just play Bran and, for example, Antique Healbot and heal for 16. That's actually pretty good. So Bran has value in a deck that happens to run a lot of Battlecry minions. But since he's just a singleton card in your deck, it's hard to build a deck around it. Mill decks, however, decks running Goldlight Oracle, have made good use of Bran because, well, you can make your opponent draw a lot of cards with this guy. And also, generic dragon decks have some very good Battlecry minions that I wouldn't mind doubling up on, such as Blackwing Corruptor dealing 6 damage to a minion is actually pretty good. Do keep in mind that many minions have battle cries that Bran doesn't really help with. Silencing a minion twice doesn't really help. Returning a minion to hand doesn't help. There are some more examples. Setting a minion's attack to 1 twice doesn't help. So Bran doesn't work with every single battle cry, but if you have a lot of beneficial battle cries that can be doubled, Bran might be a good card in your deck. And the final card, as a reward for unlocking the complete wing, we have Excavated Evil, which is a priest spell for 5 mana, deal 3 damage to all minions, and then shuffle this card into your opponent's deck. Now this card is usually compared to cards like Holy Nova, Light Bomb, and the combination of Arcanine, Soul Priest, and Circle of Healing, which offer the priest the ability to clear its opponent's board. And Excavated Evil doesn't really compare well to most of these options, because the other cards are usually just more versatile. However, if a priest were to run, for example, a Reno Jackson deck, then Excavated Evil might actually fit into that deck. So as a reward for defeating the Druid class challenge, you get Mounted Raptor, which is a 3 mana 3/2 beast, with a Death Rattle summon a random 1-cost minion. So this can easily be compared with Harvest Golem, which has the stats switched around. One can argue whether a 3/2 or a 2/3 is better, but usually Death Rattle minions are considered to be a slight bit better if their attack is higher than their health, because that means you can instantly trade them off during your next turn and get the benefit out of it. So is Mounted Raptor better than Harvest Golem? Probably slightly. This card should really only be relevant for druid decks if they are really interested in curving out, because they don't have that much other 3 mana options. Although Shade of Naxxramas is an actual card, which is used a lot in druid, and that's especially because it interacts really well with Savage Roar. So you're really looking to get benefit out of the beast tag on the mounted raptor before you'll consider this putting it into your druid deck, because most of the time Shade of Naxxramas will be better, especially in decks that run Force of Nature Savage Roar. So as a reward for defeating the Paladin class challenge, we have Keeper of Uldaman, a 4 mana 3/4 minion with Battlecry. Set a minion's attack and health to 3. That's an interesting card. We can compare it to the old version of Tankmaster Overspark, which had a Battlecry transform another minion into a 5/5 Devilsaur or a 1/1 Squirrel at random. Tankmaster Overspark used to be targeted, and the main use for this card used to be actually silencing an opponent's minion, for example Sylvanas. But the random aspect was a real strike against this deck, and accidentally turning your opponent's minion into a 5/5 may not matter all that much. Yes, you've silenced Sylvanas' ability off, but she's still a 5/5. And Keeper of Uldaman keeps a healthy medium with setting attack and health to 3, but not really helping much in the way of silence. So this is a very good card against, for example, Giants, where effects like Hunter's Mark or Humility are particularly effective, and this is both of those cards rolled into 1, so that's really effective. Although you will set it to 3 instead of 1, but luckily the Keeper of Uldaman has the stats herself to kill a 3/3 handily. Of course, use it on your own minion, and if you use it on a Silverhand Recruit, which you'll likely have on the table after using Muster for Battle on turn 3, you'll have a free Mark of the Wild on top of your 4 mana 3/4, and that's actually excellent. So this is a very good card. The only trouble people anticipated with this card is, do we actually have room for this in our Paladin decks? Because there's a lot of good 4 mana Paladin cards, basically. This card has really proven its worth, and people are usually putting 1 of these in their Paladin decks, if not 2. Spider Tank is again a good comparison. Although you are paying 1 more mana for the body here, the effect is almost always going to be useful. It's a good card. So is this expansion actually worth it for you? Well, we're dividing it into 4 different categories again, because that's the 4 reasons you might be interested in this expansion in the first place. So if you are interested in this expansion for the interesting encounters or the storyline, there are some interesting new ideas, of course, like in every single new wing. The Minecart Rite is a very unique encounter, although it is very RNG prone and not much different on heroic mode. Too bad. The normal encounters are again very easily beaten, even by suboptimal decks, as I intend to prove with my autocomplete versus encounter series, which I recommend you watch. Actually, it's a lot of fun taking random decks to these adventures and beating them into pulp. So for the challenge of heroic mode, again remember that the reward for heroic mode, being the card pack, is only attained if you actually have the complete package, meaning all 4 wings, and have actually beaten all 4 wings. The heroic encounters do offering a challenge that requires probably a specific deck to be tailor-made for this encounter specifically. The Minecart Rite does feel a bit easy if the RNG works in your favor, and I found that especially with the Arcadis encounter, the AI can be very wonky and can be cheesed a bit. I've had a moment where he dealt 9 damage with his special spell to my Sylvanas, where he could have just used it on my face to kill me, and that actually won me the game while testing a wonky Unearthed Raptor deck that wasn't really going to work against this encounter, but I still one-shotted it. So that felt a bit cheesy. The first encounter, however, is very much worth it, and is a real nail-biter. So your mileage may vary, difficulty is still very subjective. and do wait for the opinions on the last few wings, because Heroic mode is a complete package. For gimmicky cards to use in Casual or Brawl mode, this expansion offers one card for every class except Hunter, so it's a lot more of a mixed bag if you're looking for cards that are useful in a lot of different classes. This is not the wing you're looking for. There are some generally very good cards in this wing. Others are very specific, like the Unearthed Raptors, but the cards do encourage you to innovate a bit. Like the Brand Bond Spirit, which is a very good card in, for example, mill decks. Druids and Rogues will enjoy this card a lot. And Bran does have its home in a lot of other decks, a lot of gimmicky decks, but also a few competitive decks even. So for the competitive side, constructed staples, we are looking at a few cards here. First of all, Keeper of Uldaman has already proved itself to be a mainstay in Paladin decks. Unearthed Raptor has spawned an entirely new archetype of rogue decks, which is looking interesting and but might have some skewed results as a consequence of people randomly disconnecting when facing this card. So it may be a bit worse than it seems right now. Ethereal Conjurer I'm still having big hopes for, but I haven't seen it a lot in competitive mage decks, but that may happen in the future. It's still a very good card. And Tunnel's Rogue has already proved its worth in Shaman decks, mostly aggressive Shaman decks, but a few different archetypes of Shaman have already popped up. It remains to be seen which one of those will rise to the top. But this card does help Shaman a lot, it seems. Also, many cards do have potential as a singleton in a lot of decks, thanks to our friend Reno from Last Wing, because Reno incentivizes you to play with a lot of different cards in your deck. That means that while cards may not be as good as the cards you generally want in your deck, you might want to include a few side grades or downgrades just to make playing Reno possible, and that really improves the viability of a lot of cards. So in conclusion, this wing does seem a slightly bit weaker than the first wing, both in the aspect of the PvE encounters as in the constructed viability of some of these cards. Also because the high amount of class cards means that you'll likely won't be able to use every card in your favorite deck. This expansion is a mixed bag. If you play certain classes, you'll be more interested in this wing than others. Its value depends highly on the decks you actually play. So my final verdict, examine this wing carefully. If you're playing Shaman or Paladin or a semi-competitive mill deck, you'll definitely want this one. Otherwise, waiting for the next wing can't hurt, because while this specific wing may not be the most exciting for you, it does have some very interesting cards, and it is a requirement for the cards in the third and fourth wing, so if those wings end up being very important, you won't feel too bad about this one. Alright, I hope this was of some use for you. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you hopefully next week with the third wing.